The night before our anniversary, I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by balloons, streamers, and the glow of anticipation. My wife, Maria, was leaning over the guest list, meticulously making sure no one was left out. It was our 10th wedding anniversary, and she insisted we throw a party to celebrate our love. "It's a milestone," she said, her voice bright. "We should make it special." I agreed, though I wasn't a big fan of parties. I would have been content with just the two of us, but Maria's excitement was contagious. As I helped her with the preparations, something gnawed at me. It wasn't the party, the decorations, or even the thought of hosting friends and colleagues. It was him. There was one guest Maria had been insistent on inviting, a man named David, someone from her past she hadn't mentioned before. She said they had been friends since childhood, and it was important for him to be there. "You've never brought him up before," I said, trying to keep my tone casual but failing to hide my unease. Maria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not a big deal. We've been friends for ages. He just moved back to the city, and I want him to be part of this." I tried to argue, but every time I pushed, she pushed back harder. The way she spoke about him, how important it was for him to come, made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to spoil the mood. After all, it was our anniversary. If this friend meant so much to her, I could give her that. "Fine," I said finally. "Invite him." The next day, the house buzzed with excitement. Guests began to trickle in, bringing laughter, gifts, and a sense of warmth. Our friends from work mingled with old acquaintances, everyone happy to celebrate our marriage. As the party filled every corner of our home, my nerves eased. This was supposed to be a day of joy, not worry. I grabbed a drink and told myself not to overthink it. And then David arrived. He was taller than I imagined, broad-shouldered with a smile that seemed too smug. Maria greeted him with enthusiasm, wrapping her arms around him in a way that made something in my chest tighten. I had expected some form of casual reunion, but the way her eyes lit up when she saw him made me feel like I was intruding on something private. They stood close, their heads bent in conversation, laughing together while I watched from the other side of the room. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be. She was just happy to see an old friend. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed, I couldn't ignore the way she gravitated toward him, always at his side, laughing at his jokes a little too hard, leaning in a little too close. I drank to numb the nagging doubts, hoping that by the time the night was over, I would forget how her smile seemed different around him. The alcohol dulled my unease, and by evening, I found myself laughing along with everyone else, clinking glasses and telling stories. But even in my haze, I noticed one thing. Maria wasn't beside me. I tried to recall when I last saw her, but the evening was a blur of faces, music, and laughter. The unease returned, creeping up my spine as I stood up and scanned the room. No sign of her. I weaved through the crowd, calling her name, but no one had seen her recently. The first floor was packed with people, laughter still booming from the living room, but something pulled me toward the stairs. I climbed slowly, dread building with each step, until I reached the door to our bedroom. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, heart hammering in my chest, and there they were, Maria and David, naked, entwined in the sheets. Their clothes were strewn across the floor, and the stench of alcohol hung heavy in the room. They didn't even notice me standing there. My mind went blank. For a moment, I felt paralyzed, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Then the anger hit. I yelled, loud enough that the world outside the room seemed to stop. I could see David's eyes shoot open in confusion, then pain as my fist connected with his face before I even realized what I was doing. He screamed, clutching his nose as blood spurted out. Maria tried to pull me away, but I was already lost in the fury. David recovered faster than I expected. He shoved me back with surprising strength, and I stumbled, barely able to keep my balance. My vision blurred, the alcohol mixing with the rage, and suddenly everything was a mess of fists, shouts, and blood. I don't remember hitting the floor, but I do remember the sound of a wine bottle smashing against my skull. That was the last thing before everything went black. I woke up to the sterile smell of a hospital room, my head pounding, my body aching all over. Maria was beside me, her face tear-streaked and red. The moment she saw me stir, she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're awake. What happened?" I croaked. My voice felt foreign, my throat raw. "You fell," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "You were drunk. You fell down the stairs." It didn't make sense. I could barely focus, my memory fuzzy. But even through the fog of pain, I knew something wasn't right. Our stairs weren't steep enough for me to end up this banged up. My arm was in a cast, my body bruised, and the throbbing in my head told me there had been much more than a fall. But I couldn't argue. Not yet. I didn't have the strength, and so I let her lie to me. I let her stroke my arm, apologize softly, and pretend that everything was fine. But I knew better. As I drifted back into unconsciousness, one thought kept running through my mind. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. The hospital discharged me 2 days later, with strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. I could barely move without wincing. My body ached with every breath, but it wasn't the pain in my ribs or the pounding in my skull that consumed me. It was the gnawing feeling of something being terribly wrong. I couldn't shake the memory of Maria's tear-filled eyes, her whispered apologies. It all felt like a cover-up, a lie wrapped in layers of guilt. She brought me home, her voice soft and sweet, promising to take care of me, but I couldn't focus on her words. All I could think about was what I couldn't remember. "You slipped," she repeated when I asked again about the night. "You were drunk, dancing on the table, and you fell. It was horrible. I couldn't stop you." Her explanation was like a stone sinking in my gut. It didn't add up. I had been drunk, yes, but not that drunk. I remembered hearing something. I remembered looking for her, feeling the unease grip my chest as I climbed the stairs. There was something else, something just out of reach in my mind, but no matter how hard I tried to focus, it stayed buried in a haze of confusion and pain. The days blurred together after I came home. Maria was attentive, almost too attentive. She hovered over me, her eyes always scanning my face as if she were waiting for something, waiting for me to say something, to confront her, maybe. But I didn't have the strength, not yet. Every time I tried to bring up that night, she would deflect with concern. "You need to rest, love," she would say, her hand brushing through my hair. "You've been through enough." I let it go, at least on the surface. But beneath that, a storm was brewing. I spent my days lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of the night. My memories felt like shards of glass, jagged and incomplete. But each day brought a new sliver of clarity. I remembered the laughter, the music, the blurred faces of our guests. I remembered David, the smug way he'd smile when he walked through our door, how Maria's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Something had happened, I knew it. Then, one morning, I overheard her on the phone. I was lying in bed, pretending to be asleep when I heard her pacing in the hallway, her voice low but frantic. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "The doctor said it'll take time for his memory to come back, but I'm scared. He's starting to ask questions. He'll find out eventually." My heart stopped. My hands clenched the sheets. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed as still as I could, forcing my eyes shut, trying to keep my breathing even. Just keep calm, okay? We have to play it cool. He doesn't remember anything yet." The phone clicked off, and I heard her footsteps retreating. I didn't move for a long time, my mind spinning in 1,000 different directions. She was hiding something. They were hiding something. The memory of the man from that night, David, flashed in my mind. His face, his laughter, the way Maria had been glued to him. And then there was that moment before everything went dark. The sensation of fists, the wine bottle smashing, against my skull. Had there been a fight? Had he attacked me? Or had I attacked him? I needed to know. I needed answers. That night, as Maria slept beside me, I waited for her breathing to deepen, the familiar rhythm of sleep setting in. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed into the living room. Her phone was on the counter, charging. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see. I needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. Unlocking it was easy. I had seen her password enough times. I scrolled through her messages, my hands shaking, heart pounding in my chest. But there was nothing. No text to David, no messages that stood out. She had been careful, too careful. But then, something caught my eye, a deleted message. It was from the night of the party, a simple exchange with an unknown number. I clicked on it, and my heart raced as the words appeared. Unknown number? He's not going to remember, right? Maria, I don't think so. We'll just say he was too drunk. Stick to the plan. That was it. My stomach twisted in knots. Stick to the plan? What plan? I felt like the walls were closing in, the air growing thick with the weight of what I was beginning to understand. Whatever had happened that night wasn't an accident. Maria had lied to me. David had been there, in our bedroom, and they had covered it up. I shoved the phone back onto the counter, my hands trembling. She had deceived me, made me doubt my own mind, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. I said nothing, did nothing, but I could feel the truth bubbling under the surface, ready to explode. Maria was more cautious around me, watching my every move, her voice always soft, always concerned. I played along, pretending like I believed her story, but inside, I was unraveling. My memories started coming back in fragments, like flashes of lightning in the dark. The party, the sound of laughter, the way Maria and David had disappeared upstairs. The moment I walked into the bedroom, the shock, the rage. I remembered now. I remembered walking in on them, tangled in our sheets, naked. One morning, the full memory hit me like a freight train. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into my coffee, when it all came rushing back. The bedroom door, slightly open. Maria's hair a mess. David smirk as he lay beside her. The sound of my own voice shouting. The fury that surged through me as I lunged at him. We fought, fists flying, furniture crashing. And then the bottle, the shattering glass, the darkness. I had seen it. I had lived it. And now, there was no denying it. That evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I walked into the kitchen, where Maria was preparing dinner, her back to me. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. But I had to confront her. I had to know why. Maria, I said, my voice cold and sharp. She turned, smiling that same sweet, fake smile. Hey, love, how are you feeling? I remember everything, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I remember the party. I remember the fight. I remember finding you in our bed with him. Her face went pale, her hands dropping the spoon she'd been stirring with. It clattered onto the counter, but she didn't move. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice shaking. You were drunk, remember? You fell. Stop lying. I slammed my fist down on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. I saw you, Maria. I saw you with him. Her lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. The guilt, the panic, it was all there, and it was all real. Tell me the truth, I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Tell me what really happened. For a moment, she stood there, frozen, before breaking down. The tears came, and she crumbled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't mean for it to happen, she cried, her voice cracking. I was drunk, and he flirted with me. One thing led to another, and I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer, confirming everything I had feared. She had betrayed me. She had thrown everything we had built away for a moment of weakness, a fleeting pleasure with some man from her past. I stumbled back, my legs weak beneath me, as the reality of it all sank in. This was the woman I had loved, trusted with my life. And now, in the kitchen of the home we had shared, she lay there sobbing, while everything we had built came crashing down around us. I couldn't bear to look at her. I needed to get out, to breathe. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, leaving her sobbing on the floor. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, my mind spinning with the weight of Maria's confession. Her sobs echoed in my head, but they felt hollow now. Nothing she said could take back what I had seen, what I had felt when I walked into our bedroom that night. It was as if our entire marriage had unraveled in those few moments, the years we spent together reduced to ashes by one drunken betrayal. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, as if I couldn't breathe under the crushing weight of my anger, my humiliation. I replayed the fight in my mind over and over again. The moment I charged at David, the way he sneered at me, thinking he could take what was mine. And then that bottle, the way it shattered against my skull, plunging me into darkness. She lied. She lied to my face, for days, playing the role of the concerned wife while hiding her betrayal. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that she had slept with him or that she had tried to make me doubt myself. My own wife had made me question my sanity, my memories. I couldn't go home. Not yet. The thought of seeing her face, of hearing more of her apologies, made my stomach churn. Instead, I drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I needed space, somewhere quiet where I could think, where I could plan. The next few days were a blur of confusion and anger. I told Maria I needed time, and she didn't protest. Maybe she was relieved I hadn't kicked her out yet, but I didn't trust myself to make any decisions in the heat of the moment. I avoided the house as much as possible, spending my days walking aimlessly through the city and my nights in that dingy motel, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. The anger simmered, refusing to leave. I couldn't stop thinking about him, David, the smug look on his face as he staggered out of our bedroom, the casual way he had wrapped himself around my wife like it was nothing. He had violated our home, our marriage, and Maria had let him. But she wasn't the only one who would pay for this. Revenge was an idea that started small, like a whisper in the back of my mind, but it grew louder with each passing day. David wasn't just some stranger who had stumbled into our lives by accident. He had been invited by Maria, welcomed into our home like an honored guest. The thought of them laughing at me behind my back, of David thinking he had gotten away with it, made my blood boil. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit there, wallowing in my own misery, while David walked away unscathed. One evening, after days of silence between Maria and me, I went back home. It was late, past midnight, and the house was dark and quiet. I slipped inside quietly, making my way to the kitchen. I wasn't ready to talk to her, but I needed to be there. I couldn't run forever. I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where I had confronted her just days ago. The memory of her breaking down, admitting her infidelity, played over and over in my head. I could still see the fear in her eyes when I told her I remembered everything. I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing with thoughts of David, of the way I had been humiliated in my own home. I needed answers. I needed to know why. The next morning, I woke early, the exhaustion weighing heavily on me. Maria was still asleep, her face turned away from me as she lay under the covers. I couldn't stand to look at her. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and headed for the kitchen. Her phone was on the counter again. I knew it was wrong, but the need to know the truth was stronger than any sense of guilt. I picked it up, scrolling through her messages. Nothing new, just a few casual exchanges with friends and some work-related texts. She had been careful since I last checked, but I wasn't done looking. Then I found it. a folder of old photos, hidden deep in her gallery, tucked away behind layers of other folders. At first glance, they seemed harmless. Pictures of vacations, family gatherings, random moments from our lives. But as I scrolled further, my heart sank. There were pictures of David. Some were innocent enough, taken at parties or gatherings, but there was one that made my blood run cold. It was from the night of our anniversary. Maria was sitting on David's lap, her face flushed with alcohol and laughter, her arms draped around his neck. His hand was on her thigh, and her smile, it was the smile of a woman who was enjoying every moment. I felt sick. I couldn't take it anymore. That evening, I decided to confront Maria once again. I needed the truth. The full truth, not just her tearful confessions of being drunk and making a mistake. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables for dinner as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment, watching her, my anger rising with every second. "Maria," I said, my voice cold. She turned, her face pale, as she saw the look in my eyes. "I found the photos," I said, tossing her phone onto the counter. "You've been lying to me this whole time." Her hands shook as she set down the knife, her face a mixture of fear and guilt. I didn't mean for it to go this far. How long has this been going on?" I demanded, stepping closer. "How long have you been seeing him behind my back?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I had heard it all before. "It was just that night, I swear," she whispered. "I don't know what came over me." He kept flirting, and I was drunk, and... "Don't lie to me again," I shouted, slamming my fist on the counter. "I saw the pictures, Maria. I know this wasn't just some random mistake. You were planning this," she sobbed, collapsing into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't plan it," she cried. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't even know why I invited him. He was there, and I was stupid. I was so stupid." Her words hit me like a hammer, but the anger burning inside me refused to die. I couldn't forgive her, not yet. Maybe not ever. "I need air," I muttered, storming out of the house, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, the idea that had been simmering for days finally crystallized. David was going to pay for this. He had taken what wasn't his. He had humiliated me, and I wasn't going to let him walk away untouched. The first step was finding him. I started by searching Maria's contacts, scrolling through old messages and looking for anything that would lead me to him. But she had deleted most of their interactions, covering her tracks well. I needed another way. After days of searching, I found what I was looking for, a business card crumpled and forgotten in the back of her desk drawer. Michael Davidson, an old friend from work, just as Maria had claimed. But this wasn't just some old friend. This was a man who had ripped apart my life. It didn't take long to track him down. He worked at a marketing firm downtown, and after staking out his office, I discovered his routine. Every Friday night, like clockwork, he went to the same bar after work, always looking for his next conquest. He had no idea I was watching, no idea that his little game with Maria had set something darker in motion. It was a Saturday night when I decided to confront him. I had seen enough. I walked into the bar, my heart pounding with adrenaline. David was there, just as I expected, laughing with a group of women, his smug smile plastered on his face. He didn't notice me at first, too wrapped up in his performance. But as I approached, his eyes met mine, and I saw the recognition in his face. The smile faded. "What the hell do you want?" he sneered, his bravado slipping. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him outside. The cool night air hit my face as I dragged David out of the bar by his collar, his protests barely registering over the rush of blood in my ears. His bravado vanished the moment we stepped outside. I could feel the tension in his body as he tried to pull away, but I wasn't letting go. "What the hell is wrong with you?" David spat, his voice slurred from the drinks. "Get your hands off me." I ignored him, my grip tightening. My mind raced with the images of Maria and him, together in our bed, his laughter, his smugness. I had let him into my home. I had been the fool. He needed to pay for that. We stumbled into the alley behind the bar, the dim light casting shadows that matched the rage boiling inside me. I shoved him hard, and he stumbled back against the wall, glaring at me as he straightened up, brushing off his shirt like he was trying to regain some of his dignity. "You think you can just come in here and drag me out like some punk?" He sneered, his voice mocking, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't as confident as he pretended to be. "What's your problem? Your wife wasn't exactly a saint, you know." Those words. Your wife wasn't exactly a saint. It was like a match to gasoline. I lunged at him before he could even react. My fist connected with his jaw, and the impact sent a jolt of satisfaction through me. But it wasn't enough. He staggered, clutching his face, and when he looked up at me, blood was already trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You son of a—" he started, but I didn't let him finish. I grabbed him by the collar again, slamming him against the brick wall, the sound of his back hitting the concrete echoing in the empty alley. "You think you can walk into my house and take what's mine?" I growled, my voice barely recognizable, even to myself. "You think you can humiliate me, humiliate my marriage, and just walk away?" David struggled against my grip, but I was fueled by something far stronger than his half-drunken resistance. I was fueled by months of doubt, weeks of lies, and the image of my wife tangled in bed with this man. He swung at me, but I ducked, and his fist barely grazed my cheek. It was a weak punch, and I felt nothing. He wasn't used to real fights. I hit him again, this time square in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping for air, and I felt a sick kind of satisfaction as he crumpled to the ground. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. "You're going to pay for this," I said through gritted teeth as I kicked him in the ribs, the sound of the impact ringing in my ears. He groaned in pain, curling up on the ground, trying to protect himself. But I wasn't stopping, not until I'd taken back everything he had stolen from me. I lost count of how many times I hit him. My fists were raw, my knuckles split open, but I didn't care. I wanted him to feel every ounce of the pain that had been eating away at me. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be crushed, humiliated, and broken. Finally, he stopped fighting back. He lay there, a bloody mess, barely able to move. His breathing was shallow, and his face was swollen beyond recognition. The alley was silent now, the only sound the ragged breaths coming from both of us. I stared down at him, my chest heaving, my vision still red with fury. But as I stood over him, something shifted inside me. The rage that had consumed me just moments ago began to ebb away, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I had beaten him, reduced him to nothing, but instead of feeling victorious, I felt lost. I had thought revenge would give me closure, that it would heal the wounds Maria had left in me. But as I looked at David, bloody and broken on the ground, I realized it hadn't. The hole inside me was still there, gaping and raw. David groaned, his body twitching in pain as he tried to push himself up, but he couldn't. He was too weak, too broken. For a moment, I felt a surge of pity. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everything I had lost, my trust, my faith in my wife, the life we had built together. And none of that could be fixed by beating this man to a pulp. I backed away, my hands trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. I felt sick, the bile rising in my throat as I looked down at what I had done. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't a monster, but tonight I had become one. David's voice was barely a whisper, slurred with pain. "You think this is over," he gasped. "She'll never love you again." His words were like a knife twisting in my gut. He was right. No matter how much I punished him, no matter how much I raged, it wouldn't change the fact that Maria had chosen him, if only for a moment. She had betrayed me, and I could never forget that. I turned and walked away, leaving David on the ground, his body broken but his smug smile still haunting me. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had imagined. I didn't feel like I had won anything at all. When I got home that night, Maria was waiting for me, her eyes red from crying. She stood in the living room, wringing her hands together, her face pale and drawn. When she saw me, she rushed toward me, her voice trembling. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice cracking. I was worried sick. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand to stop her. "Don't pretend you care." She froze, her eyes widening as she looked at me, taking in the blood on my hands, the bruises forming on my knuckles. What did you do?" "I made him pay," I said coldly, my voice devoid of emotion. "Just like you should." Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you." Those words should have meant something. They should have made me feel something. But they didn't. "Not anymore. You don't get to say that," I said, my voice flat. "You don't get to say you love me after everything you've done." She sobbed, reaching for me, but I stepped back. "Please," she begged. "We can fix this. We can work through it. I made a mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't love you." I stared at her, the woman I had once loved with everything I had, the woman I had built my life with, trusted with my heart. And now, she was just someone I didn't recognize, someone who had torn my world apart. "I can't do this," I said, my voice breaking for the first time. "I can't forgive you." Her face crumpled again, and she collapsed into a chair, her sobs racking her body. But I couldn't comfort her. I couldn't even look at her. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice hollow. "I want you out of the house by the end of the week." Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked away, leaving her behind, just as I had left David in that alley. The silence in the house after Maria left was suffocating. The echoes of her sobs still lingered in my ears, but the house itself had fallen quiet. I stood in the empty kitchen, the faint ticking of the clock the only sound breaking the stillness. My hands, still bruised and swollen from the fight with David, trembled as I stared down at the divorce papers sitting on the counter. She had signed them this morning. When she left, she hadn't taken much, just a few bags of clothes and some personal items. Everything else remained. The photos of us from our honeymoon, the knickknacks we'd collected from the years spent building this life together. It felt strange, as if the house were stuck in some twisted version of reality, with the remnants of our life together still scattered everywhere. Yet she was gone. I thought seeing her leave would give me closure, but it hadn't. I thought filing for divorce would bring some sense of finality, some relief, but instead, I felt emptier than I ever had before. The anger that had fueled me for so long had burned itself out, leaving nothing but an aching void in its place. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of legal documents. The cold reality of what had happened, of what my life had become, hit me all over again. My marriage was over. 10 years of memories, of love, of trust. Gone, reduced to a stack of papers and a broken heart. Maria was no longer my wife. She was just a woman I used to know. The thought settled deep into my chest, heavy and cold. The next few weeks were a blur. I went through the motions, putting one foot in front of the other, trying to move forward, but it felt like I was walking through a fog. Work became my refuge, a place where I could bury myself in tasks, numbers, and deadlines, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to the house, back to the memories of her. But even there, I wasn't safe. Every corner of my life had been touched by Maria, every part of me haunted by the ghost of what we once were. I kept expecting the anger to come back, to flare up inside me the way it had that night in the alley with David. But it didn't. Instead, there was just a dull ache, a constant reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. I barely slept. Every night, I lay in the bed we used to share, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of her. I wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she was with him. The thought of her in someone else's arms, laughing, smiling, made me feel sick, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop torturing myself with the idea that she had moved on while I was still stuck, drowning in the wreckage of our marriage. One night, weeks after she had left, I found myself standing in the living room, staring at the photo of us from our wedding day. It was still sitting on the mantel, untouched, a painful reminder of everything we had once promised each other. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the edges of the frame. In the photo, we were both smiling, so young, so full of hope. Maria looked radiant in her wedding dress, her eyes shining with happiness. And I looked like a man who believed in forever. How naive I had been. I smashed the photo frame against the floor, the glass shattering across the hardwood. The sound echoed through the empty house, but I didn't care. I kicked the broken pieces aside, tears stinging my eyes as I slumped down onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I hadn't cried since the night I found out about her betrayal. I hadn't let myself feel anything but anger. But now, the weight of it all came crashing down on me. The pain, the loss, the humiliation, it all hit me at once. I sobbed, the sound raw and guttural, as the grief poured out of me in waves. I had lost everything. I had lost her, and I didn't know how to move forward. In the days that followed, I decided to sell the house. I couldn't live there anymore, surrounded by the memories of a life that no longer existed. Every room, every piece of furniture reminded me of Maria, of the nights we spent curled up on the couch watching movies, the mornings we shared coffee in the kitchen, the plans we had made for the future. I needed a clean slate. I needed to leave it all behind. I contacted a real estate agent, and within weeks, the house was on the market. It was strange watching strangers walk through the rooms, commenting on the layout, the size of the backyard, the potential it had. They didn't know the history, the pain that was soaked into every wall. They didn't know that this house had once been a home, a place filled with love and laughter. They didn't know that it had become a graveyard for my marriage. As I packed up my things, I found myself sorting through the remnants of our life together. Old love letters, birthday cards, mementos from trips we had taken. I threw most of it away, but there were some things I couldn't part with, things that reminded me of the good times, before everything fell apart. But no matter how hard I tried to purge the past, it clung to me. It lingered in the back of my mind, a constant shadow that I couldn't shake. Eventually, the house sold, and I moved into a small apartment downtown. It was a far cry from the life I had known, but it was a fresh start. I didn't need much, just a place to sleep, a place to think. I spent my days working and my nights alone, trying to figure out who I was without her, without the life we had built together. There were days when I felt like I was starting to heal, like the wound wasn't as raw as it had been. But then there were days when the pain would hit me all over again, like a punch to the gut. I would think about Maria, about David, about the night I found them together, and the anger would flare up again, but it was never as intense as it had been before. It was fading slowly, like an old scar that would always be there, but wouldn't hurt as much with time. One evening, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop, staring out the window at the busy street outside. People passed by, laughing, talking, living their lives. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like the world was moving on without me. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. There was no more anger, no more bitterness, just a quiet acceptance of what had happened. Maria had betrayed me, and I had done things I wasn't proud of in response. But I had survived it. I had made it through the storm, and now there was nothing left but the slow process of healing. Revenge hadn't given me the closure I thought it would. Beating David hadn't taken away the pain, and divorcing Maria hadn't erased the memories. But what it had done was give me the chance to start over, to rebuild, and maybe, just maybe, I could learn to forgive myself for everything that had happened. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced down at my phone. There was a message from an old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, I'm in town. Let's catch up." For the first time in months, I smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was starting to see the path forward, and that was enough. The weeks following the move were strange. I woke up each morning to unfamiliar surroundings, my body still adjusting to the small apartment. There were no memories here, no echoes of laughter, no arguments in the kitchen, no lingering scent of Maria's perfume. The walls were bare and the furniture sparse, but that emptiness felt like a relief. It was a clean slate, one that didn't carry the weight of betrayal. But even in this new space, the past lingered in my mind. The betrayal wasn't something that could be erased just because I had left the house. I carried it with me, the memories of that night still raw. Some days were easier than others. I could go through the motions, work, errands, the occasional dinner with a friend, and almost forget. But there were nights when it all came rushing back, when the loneliness settled in, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had fallen apart so quickly. It was during those nights that I realized the wound Maria had left wasn't just about the affair. It was about trust. I had trusted her completely, believed in our marriage, our future. And now, that trust was shattered, not just in her, but in myself. I didn't trust my own instincts anymore. I had been blind, so sure that our love was unbreakable, and now I questioned every decision, every emotion. I had thought revenge would fix things, that punishing David and divorcing Maria would bring me peace. But standing over David's bloodied body in that alley hadn't healed me. If anything, it had only deepened the emptiness inside me. The satisfaction I had craved was fleeting, leaving behind a darker, more complicated kind of pain. A few months passed, and life slowly began to find a rhythm again. The divorce was finalized, the house was sold, and I had settled into the new apartment. Work kept me busy, but the anger that had once consumed me had faded into a dull ache. I wasn't angry at Maria anymore. I wasn't even angry at David. I was angry at myself, at the choices I had made, at the way I had let myself spiral. One night, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of me and Maria, smiling, happy, full of love. I paused on one from our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, the sun setting behind us, our arms wrapped around each other, laughing. For a moment, I stared at it, my chest tightening with the weight of what we had lost. But then I did something I hadn't been able to do before. I deleted it. I deleted all of them, every photo, every reminder of our life together. It wasn't out of anger or spite, but because I finally realized that holding on to them was holding on to something that no longer existed. Our marriage was gone, and I needed to stop clinging to the remnants of it. Deleting those photos felt like closing a door, one that had been left open far too long. The next day, I took a walk through the park near my apartment. The weather was cool, the sky a pale gray, and the trees had started to shed their leaves. I watched as people jogged by, as parents pushed strollers and couples strolled hand in hand. It should have made me feel lonely, watching other people share the kind of connection I had lost, but instead I felt calm. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I didn't feel the anger or the shame or the crushing sadness that had followed me since the night I discovered Maria's betrayal. I just felt still. It was in that stillness that I realized something important. Healing wasn't going to happen all at once. There wasn't going to be some grand moment where everything suddenly clicked into place, and I felt whole again. It was going to be a slow process, one that would take time, patience, and effort. And more than anything, it was going to take forgiveness, not just of Maria, but of myself. Forgiveness had always seemed like a distant, impossible thing. How could I forgive Maria for what she had done? How could I forgive David for being a part of it? But over time, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting them off the hook. It wasn't about excusing their actions or pretending that what had happened didn't matter. It was about releasing the grip that the past had on me. It was about freeing myself from the bitterness that had been eating away at me for months. One afternoon, I found myself in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee and staring out the window at the bustling street outside. People were moving on with their lives, and for the first time, I felt like I could too. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Maria's name. My finger hovered over the delete button for a long time. A part of me still felt tethered to her, still felt like there was unfinished business between us. But as I sat there, I realized that holding on to her number wasn't going to change anything. She was gone, and I needed to let her go. I pressed delete. It wasn't easy moving on. There were days when I still thought about her, when the memories would sneak up on me, catching me off guard. But with each passing week, the pain became a little less sharp, the memories a little less consuming. I started to reconnect with old friends, people I had pushed away during the chaos of the divorce. I went out more, met new people, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of hope. One evening, I was out with a few friends at a small bar downtown. The air was warm, the drinks flowing, and the laughter easy. As the night wore on, I found myself talking to a woman sitting beside me. Her name was Emily, and she had an easy smile, the kind that put me at ease almost immediately. We talked for hours, about nothing and everything. There was no pressure, no expectations. It was just nice to connect with someone, to feel a spark of something that I hadn't felt in a long time. As the bar started to close, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I hesitated for a moment, the fear of opening myself up to someone new tugging at me. But then I smiled and said yes. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Emily at a small cafe. The conversation was light, easy, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Maria. I wasn't thinking about the past, or the betrayal, or the pain. I was just present. We started seeing more of each other. And though I was cautious, I could feel something growing between us. It wasn't the intense, all-consuming love I had once shared with Maria, but it was something softer, quieter, something that felt real. As the months went on, I found myself thinking less about revenge, about the need to get back at those who had hurt me. I stopped obsessing over what had happened and started focusing on what could happen. The future didn't feel as bleak anymore. It felt uncertain, yes, but also full of possibilities. I still wasn't fully healed. There were scars, both physical and emotional, that would probably never fully fade. But I was starting to understand that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to carry it with you without letting it drag you down. I thought about David sometimes, wondered what had happened to him after that night in the alley. Part of me wanted to believe he had learned something from it, that he had changed, but I knew better than to dwell on that. He wasn't my concern anymore. I had my own life to rebuild. The story of my marriage, of the betrayal that had shattered it, would always be a part of me. But it wasn't the whole story. It was just one chapter in a much larger book. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside, I realized that I had finally turned the page.